Hi, Internet. Welcome to My Friends Like Cool Shit. I am beyond thrilled to talk this week with Amy, who I lived with for many, many years and I love so much. And it's so nice to see her face, even virtually on a computer. And Amy's thrown a curveball as she wanted me to pick her topic and let her know before we recorded. So,
I'm almost regretting that right now, but we'll see how this goes.
well, when I told you I was already doing an early video on Mad Max, it really threw you for a loop. So,
Yeah, I'm not going to be honest. I was pretty pissed off about that because as soon as you texted me the podcast you were doing, that was the first thing I thought of. I'm like, that's what I'm going to talk about. And then you immediately said no. I
when
didn't even have
as
to tell you what I wanted.
And as Jules and I talked about, I told her that you're upset, and she loved the idea of you talking about it, and then the two of you coming on and talking about it together too. So we're just generating future content.
I like it.
All right. And your one caveat was probably not Star Wars, which is fair because I didn't want to do the research to talk Star Wars. So we're gonna throw an oddball one in there. This isn't like a topic of something you watch or see, but just the fact that we both love actually owning physical media, which was one of the first things I learned about you with your DVD and Blu-ray collection. So yeah, let's talk about why we love owning physical media, Ames.
Yeah, well, especially with the DVDs and movies and everything, I've been noticing this a lot frequently or recently because I don't have those in my apartment yet. And then when my internet gets messed up, I can't watch anything. And I'm just sitting here bored to pieces, like, well, I want to watch something, but I can't because the internet's so unreliable. And I think I also just have the doomsday mentality of eventually the internet's going to crash and we're never going to be able to stream again. So I like having those hard copies. That's never going to be an issue for me.
Well, the other thing is you're more of a movie than a television person, but when it comes to especially sitcoms in the like late 90s, early 2000s, they licensed the music for video release, but not streaming release. So a show like Scrubs, which you know I love, they often have to fill in songs when a song was like picked for a certain moment. So on streaming, you'll get another song. So in that case, owning the DVD or Blu-ray just for the intellectual property. I'm not sure how often it happens in movies, but I'm sure in some of the older movies it's got to be the same because when these licensing deals were written, they had no idea what streaming was going to be. So, and I'm of the opinion that soundtracks are important. So, if you're not getting the song that was intended to be there, it's going to change things.
Yeah, I don't think I realized that that was something that happened. Um, but yeah, that can totally change the mood of a scene. That can change the message of it if it's not exactly what was intended. It changes your memory of it too when you're watching it and it's not right compared to how you remember it.
Yeah, exactly. Now, for something like Lord of the Rings, which I did notice you watched on streaming, which I found hilarious knowing you own them, but now it makes sense knowing your stuff isn't fully in your apartment yet, like why you were watching that. So we do stream and we
Mhm.
share multiple streaming services from across the country right now. But with Lord of the Rings, where a lot of the music was composed for the movie, that's not going to affect things.
Right.
But a movie like Take Me Out Tonight with the guy from uh, Topher from that 70s show, it's all 80s themed music. So if they didn't license it for streaming as well, that movie's going to be different on streaming. I don't know how many times you're going to rewatch that movie anyway. It was okay, but it wasn't great. But
Not as many
and
times as you're going to rewatch Lord of the Rings, that's for sure.
I've made it through the first movie once, so I remember when you got a car with a CD player, how excited you were to buy CDs to listen to it too. Like your love of actually owning things goes deep.
Yeah. Um, I think the CDs for me, it was just so exciting because the car I had before that, I had nothing. I didn't have a radio. I didn't have any type of speakers. It was a 1988 Honda Civic, kind of like the definition of beater cars. So once I got my CRV and I realized I could listen to CDs, I think I went on like a binge one day during my shift at the exchange through some artists that I like, just grabbing things like, oh, this is $3. I'll take that home. This is $5. I'll take this home too. Um, it's just something about always having those options right next to you and being able to touch those options. And I think the browsing of it too, right? Because I find that with books a lot. is I don't mind ebooks because I like having my Kindle and I like having 12 books there or more and not physically carrying 12 books, but there's something about being able to look at the table of contents, physically turn a page, and you don't get that with any of the online media, books, music, movies, whatever. It's not the same.
You're going to be shocked to hear this, but I recently bought an e-reader.
Nah.
Yeah, I bought an e-reader, and only because with doing the other podcast, No Coast Defenders, we were mostly talking about comic book adaptions, but I wanted to go back and read some of the comic books, and I don't have the money to buy comic books the way I do other things. I mean, yes, you can spend $14 on a trade that collects 5 or 6 issues of a comic book, but at the same time, that trade leads into another trade, leads into another trade. Whereas if I'm spending $14 on a book, there might be a couple sequels to that book, but it's not ever never ending. So I did get an e-reader for the purpose of reading comic books with Marvel Unlimited and some of the free stuff that was out there, but it's just not the same. I used it for about a week. It's been sitting on my desk uncharged since then. So
I'm
I,
not surprised. My Kindle's the same way right now. It's on my bookshelf, not doing anything.
well, and the underrated thing about buying stuff, and we're in a unique position. We can speak about this on both ends, but it's actually talking to the salespeople in a store where you're buying stuff. And you mentioned the exchange where we both worked for years, and how often people would come in and trade stuff, and then you'd see that person a couple weeks later when they had money again, like buying back the same thing or something similar, or they'd be trading in a regular edition to buy a deluxe edition.
Mhm.
So this is a real thing going in, and like people still love browsing and buying things. And my e-reader hasn't been touched simply because I went to a comic book shop here in Colorado Springs, music Muse Comics and Games. The lady working was wonderful, gave me a recommendation I enjoyed, and it was just great to be out again, especially after this long COVID. And as you know, I moved across the country, and I know no one but the people I live with who are my family. So, you know, but what? Let's talk about working at the exchange with the physical media. What were some of your favorite exchanges, not to use the word as a pun, that you kind of like saw coming in with some of that physical media?
Um, I always liked when kids would come in with their Christmas money or their birthday money or whatever, and the excitement that they get from being able to physically hold a DS game or hold that volume of Sesame Street or whatever it is they were getting, and just seeing their delight at actually having something that's theirs. I can't tell you how many Skylanders I've had to sort through with kids who needed to find just the right one, and how much kids know about Skylanders. I still feel like I know nothing after 4.5 years working there. But just the way owning something means something, because all of a sudden, like, you have something to show for whatever hard work they did to get that cash to go out and then have something, you know.
You mentioned the Skylanders, and it's amazing how many kids love them, especially because they weren't really making new Skylanders by the time we were finishing up our time there, but kids were still like on the hunt all the time. And
Right.
we, I think we just made our life simple by pricing them really low in the first place, so we didn't have to do too much research. But yeah, the joy of kids' faces when they got games or Skylanders, or even there was one day you and I were working with the manager. The two of you guys were behind the counter, and a couple teen girls came in looking for teen rom coms, I think it was, and you guys both like lit up and were like, "That's your man over there."
Go
And
find Gregory.
those exchanges are always fun because it was like one friend who's really into this trying to introduce another one into it. The
Mhm.
same thing, we saw obviously a lot of college students coming in on a Saturday night looking for quick DVDs. Couples would come in on a Friday night looking for a movie to watch. And it was always like thinking, these are my people, because there's literally billions of movies available online right now for free. And you guys want to come buy something for $3 to $5 to watch.
Right. And
I
I
get
love
it.
that people came in wanting suggestions. I don't think there was ever, I mean, I'm sure there might have been one or two, but of the shifts that I worked, I feel like every time someone came in and said, "Hey, what do you know about this? What could you recommend?" And what I would find doing, because people would come in and look for horror movies, and I knew a little bit about those. So I would find I'd be skimming the shelves to find something for them. And then I'd be like, oh, wait, you might actually really like this one. It connects to this. So I kind of found myself hopping from case to case, pulling things out to give them ideas. And again, you can go on your Netflix or whatever streaming and it says, if you like this, you might like this. But I usually find the pairings to be a little off because it's computer generated, right? We know the computer is not going to generate perfectly compared to actually talking to a person and getting a person suggestion. That seems to be much more accurate.
Yeah, especially even one of the my favorite recommendations that while working there was early on when I was working there, and it was a guy who's in regularly, really, really handsome dude, always in a white t-shirt. You would definitely recognize him if you saw him. Never knew his name, but he was just talking in general about movies, and got onto the movie Gone Baby Gone, which stars Casey Affleck and directed by his brother Ben. It was Ben's first directing film, and I'd mentioned how much I love the author who wrote the book, and this guy came in like 2 weeks later to tell me how much he loved the author and that he'd picked up everything. And it was just one of those, I never wanted to be the guy sending someone outside of the store we worked in to buy something, but it came up in a casual conversation about the movie I was trying to sell him. And he bought that movie, then bought the book. And it was just a chain reaction of talking because he was looking for something in a physical media. I then, a couple months later, ran into him in Barnes and Noble too. So we had a lot of aligned interests, and that's one of the things about going and actually buying something from a person, as you were just saying, because he felt the vibe of who I was in that conversation and
Mhm.
was like, I think I'm going to like what he likes to read, and boom.
Yeah. So interesting fun fact about physically reading in a book. I read this book. It's called Reader Come Home. I want to say it's by Marianne Wolf, and it talks about how um, digital reading, tablets, and things like that are kind of destroying the reading brain. And one of the things that she brings up is that when we sit down and turn the page and read a novel, we're just immersed in this understanding of empathy for the characters in a very different way than if we just tap on a screen. And I feel like we can feel that in our personal interactions, running into someone in the bookstore or giving recommendations, because you still have that personal connection that you don't necessarily get on a screen. Like obviously we have video chatting now, so we have this personal internet connection right now. But especially with reading, it affects you differently whether you have a hard copy or a digital copy, which I found really interesting.
Which is something I definitely feel. I'm in a Skype book club with people like from across the country, and oftentimes we'll all read the ebook, and I didn't buy one of the books recently, and I struggled to get through it on the ebook version. And I was like, all right, I'm just going to have to buy the book. And of course, I'm really weird about a lot of my books in particular, but of my physical media, I only like trade paperback books. They're what feel best in my hand. I think they're what look best on a shelf. So
Mhm.
I will only buy a hardcover if there's no other option. Same with mass market. And this was a new release book and it wasn't available in paperback. And I'm like, I'm not spending $30 on a book I'm not going to like the feel of in my hand. So I tried the ebook, but I will have to go with the hardcover from this point on because I can't do the ebook reading for those exact reasons you said. There's no
Yeah.
connection to the book.
Hmm. And I find myself with the ebooks more than with a physical book. I'll go a few pages and I get so distracted by the time at the top. Or with Kindle, they say you have this many pages left, or it's going to take you this long to read the rest of the book. And there's all these little minute distractions on it that I constantly have to go back and reread, compared to if I'm sitting on my couch with a physical book, my phone face down somewhere, I can go undistracted for hours compared to every 5 seconds there's something that I'm seeing.
Yeah, and I think that's similar with a DVD or Blu-ray too. You don't abandon it. Like if you're streaming and you don't like something, you just hit the back button and you've got that whole list again. But if you're only lukewarm on something that you've put in the DVD or Blu-ray player, you don't want to get up off the couch and change the movie again. So there's just something that keeps you more engaged with the idea. I don't like abandoning movies much anyway, so
Right.
but I'm more likely to stop watching halfway through a movie thinking I'll get back to it later if I'm streaming it and
Mhm.
maybe never getting back to it.
Yeah, there's a certain commitment with physical media, no matter what it is, movie, book, or anything, that keeps you connected. And it's, I guess maybe it's like the finality of making the decision, this is what I'm going to watch, or this is what I'm going to read, compared to, like you said, there's the back button. And you can go 5 seconds into something and say, you know what, I saw something else that looked more interesting. Again, it's that distraction. The fact that you have those quick, easy options, you can't stay engaged with the content.
Yeah, and then even with music, you can skip a track on a CD or you can move the needle to another track on a record, but I'm more likely to listen to an album from beginning to end in a physical form. Whereas if I'm pulling up Spotify, I'm going to just probably hit shuffle on an artist or I'm going to do a auto generated playlist, which is great for discovering new stuff, but
Mhm.
there's less of a connection. I just feel like I've loved certain songs I've discovered in the last couple of years through Spotify, but I don't have the connection to those the way I do when I put an LL Cool J record on because I grew up listening to an LL Cool J album beginning to end, or an Elliott Smith record. I'm listening to it beginning to end. Whereas a new artist like Jeff Rosenstock, who I love, I don't think I've listened to an album of his beginning to end. I'll put him on shuffle, or I'll put on a playlist of artists similar, and so I don't have that same connection to him as I would an artist I grew up listening to before streaming. And
Yeah.
I think Ben Queller, when I saw him a few years ago in Pittsburgh, he summed that up. He asked the crowd who still listened to full albums because his record label told him that people don't. And he'd had a couple singles out. And so he had over like 3 years, like 3 or 4 singles. I heard him play two of them, and he just released the album at the beginning of this year. And I'm like, wow, I'm so glad you're still committing to this, even though you were told people don't listen to albums anymore. And I've listened to that album back to front a couple times now. So
Yeah. There's a certain authenticity to being able to listen to an album start to finish. And especially, I know you're real big on your records. So having that very physical media is different, because when you listen to an album start to finish, you get the story of it. You get the flow of it. You're understanding the whole aspect of it, compared to with Spotify, you get the snippets and then you're on to somebody else that might not be at all connected in the same way that had you listened to the whole album, it would have been connected.
yeah, and then you get the snippets based on an algorithm that they're like, oh, you listen to Charlie Bliss and Bright Eyes. Let's give you this artist who has one song who intersects in that, but nothing else in the discography. Listen to that. If I were to listen to the album, I'd know, oh, yeah, no, I like this one song. And that is it. And there's nothing wrong with doing one great song as a musician. I've never done one great song. I will never do one great song. So, mad respect to everyone who can. But I want to know that I love an artist if I'm going to love an artist, not just love their one song and think I love the artist.
Yeah.
The other thing I think about physical media that people don't take into account is the communal in general. You might own a book that no one but you know is going to read, but because it's on a bookshelf in a room in your house, someone is going to come over and you're going to have a conversation about that book because it seems interesting.
Hmm.
And with you, I remember we had a party, if you will, at our place, and it was a bunch of friends of mine for I think it was my birthday party. And at one point, there was a group digging through one of my bins of vinyls to see what records I have, while there's another group in the living room looking at your case of DVDs and Blu-rays and talking about that. And so there's just these two communal groups in this party that weren't necessarily good friends
Hmm.
discussing about our taste in movies and music. So
Yeah, it's such, it's again, it's that connection piece that we're seeing. What I also like about physical media is, if I'm having a conversation about it with someone, I can say, hey, take it with you and bring it back and tell me what you think. I can't really necessarily share a movie on my streaming site. Maybe someone has the same site, but there's something very personal And I think it just shows great care for someone when you're like, this is my movie, you're gonna like it, take it with you, bring it back and we can talk. There's like a finality with it that that person is going to come back, hopefully with your stuff, and then you can talk about your shared experience with it.
When I lend someone a book, I just assume there's an 85% chance I'm never getting that book back. And I'm okay with it. I love owning the books, but I love sharing them just as much. So I had a friend when I was a teenager do a summer in Alaska and asked for book recommendations. And I just gave her 3 books off my shelf I thought she would enjoy. And I knew I was never seeing them back. She was taking them to Alaska to do like a dog sledding internship. Of course, I was never going to get those books back, but just the act, that communal act of like, hey, these are books I really enjoyed that I think fit your personality. Please
Mhm.
take them. And I've seen you exchange so many movies with people, or you're like, oh, here's a stack of movies you might like, and they'll give you a stack of movies. And
I
sometimes it
think
takes you a little bit longer to watch them all, but
right. I think I still have two of George's movies from the exchange. He let me borrow two of them. I know I've watched one. The other one I haven't gotten to watching. But I should, that's a good reminder for me to reach out and say, hey, I still have your movies.
so I'd say, and
I'll watch them. We
you'll
can talk
never see Georgie again.
about
And that was, um, I think he's a great example. You and I both adore the guy, but he connects mainly through what he likes. So if he can't talk to you about movies, or he had recently in the last couple years gotten into music, if he can't talk movies and music and video games with you, like he doesn't connect well with people. But listen to him talking about movies and video games in particular, he's the most social person in the world. And just having the idea that he can loan things and have physical copies, and he loves his t-shirts and his Blu-rays and his video games. And
I love the way he would like pull a movie that he was going to put on the shelf and he would like start laughing and point to something on the cover and tell a little tidbit about it. So having that in his hands reminded him of something and brought a whole conversation about because of it.
yeah, and it's really difficult to pull that random tidbit if you're just looking at a title on a streaming, and you might get a thumbnail of an image for the movie or something. But
Mhm.
there's a reason that graphic designers got so much money for so many years to design the covers of books and albums and movies, and like the posters involved in it, because as much as the old cliches, don't judge a book by its cover, that's exactly how you pick books, is you look at the cover. And it's the same with movies and DVDs. Like a catchy movie poster or cover is going to jump out at you or remind you of something else. And it's supposed to. That's, we're visual creatures. So
Mhm.
something like that, and that just adds to, once again, like the communal aspect of it is George seeing something on a cover that sends him on a random tirade that sends him on another one, and it's 15 minutes later, but that was a conversation you weren't going to have if George didn't have that physical copy in his hands.
Right. And I love when you're looking at the cover of an album or a movie or whatever it might be, it gives you just enough information to start to form an opinion on what it might be. Because you also get the little synopsis on the back or the front cover. So you have a limited amount of information. What I really don't like about streaming sites, I think Netflix does this the most, is they'll go and if you hover over a movie for too long, they'll like start playing a random scene from it. I don't want to know what's going to happen. I just want to look at this, read the title, see who's in it, and decide if it's worth watching or not. I don't want you to spoil it for me.
Yeah, the only time I like that is if Sam Rockwell's in a movie and I'm looking for it on a streaming service. I do like to see random scenes of Sam Rockwell dancing. But honestly, if I'm looking for a Sam Rockwell movie, I don't need that anyway. I know Sam Rockwell. I know I'm going to want to watch that movie with him. And that's just something. But putting Sam Rockwell on a movie cover does that just as effective as anything else. So
Without the 30-second or however long those previews can be.
yeah, and sometimes they'll add like little credits before they get into the previews. Sometimes they'll jump in, so there's no consistency with it at all.
Mhm.
Whereas, like, give me a blurb with a synopsis, maybe a couple reviews, and let me go on my own.
Right. What I noticed too is they'll occasionally do, um, they'll play just little scenes from it, but not the dialogue from the scenes. They'll just do like one overarching song with it that doesn't always have a connection to the film. So that's always confused me, is if you're going to try to show me what's going to happen, just show me what's going to happen.
Yeah, and especially the one random song. It's almost like their trailers, and as anyone who's watched a lot of trailers knows, sometimes the trailers aren't indicative of what a movie is at all. There's scenes that didn't end up making the final cut because the people who cut the trailers aren't the same people who made the movie. They didn't have any say in it. And good studios make good trailers, whether the movie's bad or not. And so you don't get anything from that. Now, of course, you would think good studios would write good synopses of a movie, but oftentimes you can read a synopsis of a movie no matter how well it's written and know this isn't for me. But a good trailer can fool you into almost anything.
Yeah. I think everyone's had that experience of seeing a trailer before their movie at the movie theater and saying, oh, I have to watch that when it comes out. And then when it gets around to there, you're kind of sitting there confused of why you ended up there in the first place, because it was not at all what you felt like it was advertised to be.
Well, and that was, I'd never seen the trailer for Mad Max Fury Road, but a couple weeks ago when Jules was on with me, she'd mentioned the trailer being kind of misleading because there was very little Charlize in the trailer and mostly Tom Hardy. And so it made you think that this was going to be a very bro-y movie if you only saw the trailer. Now, Charlize was the central figure of the posters, but not in the trailer. So the trailer was cut in a way to make bro-y guys feel like they were going to a bro-y movie. And then you get Charlize Theron being a fucking badass throughout the whole movie. And that's just a situation that if you hold a physical copy of it, you see, oh yeah, no, this is a movie about Charlize Theron being a badass. This isn't a Mel Gibson remake.
No more of those.
Yeah.
But then you almost have to wonder, it's like, because all of the like print marketing was kind of indicating that maybe the video marketing and the trailers, you want to bring in another audience, right? Because if we market something too much as a woman's going to be a badass, we know the bros don't want to watch it, right? So you have to give them enough so that they're still going to show up, they're still going to buy their ticket, and they're going to watch it. And whether they realize what's happening or not, they still have to, you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, and it's unfortunate that you can't sell a movie on how great Charlize Theron is and a badass female lead, but unfortunately, that's the world we live in. And the movie was phenomenal, so that's all we need, really.
Right.
And it's one you definitely own, and
I do.
you fell asleep too many times.
And yeah, I have the black and chrome edition too. So I have it in that real gritty black and white film. And I have the regular edition. I think I have 2 copies of the regular edition because I bought the black and chrome and it came with the regular. But that's one that I know that is on my shelf. It's not packed away. So I can watch it anytime.
Well, and that's the black and chrome edition makes me think about just the special edition DVDs. And I know some streaming services are better about this. Disney Plus for their Marvel films has added a lot of the behind the scenes footage and stuff. So it's moving there, but DVD extras and Blu-ray extras and the fact that you can buy an edition that's got 2, 3, sometimes 4 cuts of a movie.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas HBO Max had to make a big deal about a Snyder Cut version. And I'm like, well, you could have just released a special edition Blu-ray of that instead of making a big deal on your streaming service, and it wasn't worth all the hype anyway. But it's so nice to think that you can get a 20th anniversary of Blade Runner that's got both the director's cut and the studio, and then a third cut, and you're like, oh, this is awesome to own because it'll have a great piece of artwork in it and everything, and just the extras you get when you physically buy something.
Mm-hmm. Like I remember growing up watching Lord of the Rings. We're gonna go back to there because that's another one of my favorite film series. But being able to watch in the extended editions that come with like 8 discs and going through, I've watched every single special features disc, and that really brings you into the world of the film. The things the actors had to go through for filming, things they had to improvise at the last minute, all of those things like that you don't get from just watching the movie. And being able to go back and see those gives you a really great appreciation for the process and the product when you're finally looking at it.
Well, especially because Lord of the Rings is unlike any other movie and then movie series, the way it filmed and how intensive it was. Like, you're not going to get an idea of what the Lord of the Rings filming was like by watching a behind the scenes of Blade Runner on that documentary. Like, so these are very different things. And just like Mad Max is going to be a very different thing than three of those. So it's nice when these features are there and you
Mhm.
don't get those on Netflix. Now, I think as the streaming wars get more competitive, if a studio produced a movie, we'll probably see more of those in extras features, but it will never be the same as popping in the special features disc and knowing what you're getting. I'm like, you're gonna like, if it's a comedy, you're gonna get a bunch of outtakes with a comedian screwing up a line and everyone dying for 5 minutes. And yes, that doesn't make for a good movie, but it makes for a good 15-minute watch. There's nothing like seeing an actor screw up a line in a comedy or nail the line and everyone die laughing, so they have to cut a scene. I love that stuff. And I think YouTube, there are blooper reels on YouTube and everything, but you have to search for those.
Mhm.
And if you just own the DVD, you can put them on.
Yeah, it's the accessibility of being able to have them all right there. You know exactly where they are. You know it's always going to be available compared to, like you said, having to search for things. And just the different things you can expect or the things that you might not be expecting when you're watching the special features. Like one I can think of is House of a Thousand Corpses. Rob Zombie did a director commentary edition of it, and I was expecting like all of this cool information and Rob Zombie to say, "Yeah, this scene we did all this stuff." And I don't know if he was just in a terrible mood when he did it, but he was so lethargic and annoyed the whole time, but it was so fun to watch this really horrific and intense movie and hearing him comment on it with very little emotion. It was funny. It changed the movie entirely for me.
Well, and similarly with The Office, they have an episode in one of the seasons where there's three members of the crew who do the commentary, which is just great. I mean, so often you get a star or a director or a writer, but the idea of like, oh yeah, no, you can put a crew commentary, and it's different to hear the story from the costume department's point of view. They're gonna have different stories than props or the writer's room. And so the fact that you can do this is just such a big selling point. I mean, that's maybe where studios should be focusing on with DVD releases. But I know so many retailers are downsizing what they have to sell physically. But yeah, if you were to tell me, hey, we're going to do a special edition of My Name is Earl, only the commentary is going to come just from the production crew, I would be buying the new My Name is Earl DVDs, even though I own a few seasons of My Name is Earl, because you're damn right. I want to hear commentary from the cameraman. So I think that's such a big selling point, but I don't know how big it is for it. It might be just a small, weird market of us and the folks that would visit us at the exchange.
I don't think the market's really as small as we might think it is, though, because kind of the natural human tendency is I want to know more, I want to see more, I want to understand more, I want to investigate this. And I feel like that's what special features allow you to do. Now, not everyone wants to invest the amount of time that we have obviously invested in these things, but it's still something fun. If you finish the movie and you really enjoyed it, like, oh, I want to go watch this part of the special features. I want to see how they did the makeup. I want to see how they were able to pull off this fight scene. It's just those little bits of information that are, I feel like, pique everyone's interest. Everyone wants to know how they pull off the big explosion scene, you know?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And with all the rewatch series that are becoming podcasts, and what I hear from many of them I listen to is how many of the people listening to the podcast want to hear from props and costume and makeup. And so you're right. I think it probably is a bigger market than I'm originally thinking it. And especially if you look at the revival of niche retail markets, used bookstores have bounced back hard the last couple of years pre-pandemic, while the I mean the fact that the big chains have boiled down to Barnes and Nobles and Books a Million and just that's it. But there's the market for it. Record stores have bounced back huge in the last couple of years, and we obviously know from working in a secondhand store that secondhand stores are thriving as long as they're run well,
Mhm.
because there's a market for people that want to physically get a copy in their hands. And even for us at the secondhand store, the new stuff we sold was not cheap, but we still had people that would rather come in and buy the expensive Blu-ray we had when you could get it for $8 cheaper at Target, just because they wanted to come into our store and see what else was there.
Right.
And of course, some of us employees were going elsewhere to buy those expensive versions, but
But we don't talk about that. We supported our store. We supported our store well. I spent way too much money at the exchange during my years there.
I spent less than you did, but still a decent amount. Of course, for you, you always had a box that employees created for you that was just there and ready for you.
That was true. I would get pictures. People would text me, "Hey, I'm putting this in holds for you." I'm like, "Okay, I guess I'm buying that."
And I think that's part of the joy, though, of the connection we all had with you was when something came in that was like, oh, this is perfect for Amy. Or I think a Conan Pop came in, and the trader, who I will not name a name of, but priced it slightly lower than it was worth, knowing it was going to be me that was going to buy it. And that's just that connection we would form working in those physical media. And it was, I think, the physical media helped us connect a lot with the customers. We all had favorite customers we liked. We had customers who were just generally annoying, but we liked a little bit more because how passionate they were about the stuff they were buying.
Mhm.
Now, when some of those started showing up at the house, it was a little disheartening, but
A little bit. But I think you're right. I think there's something really special in relationships and friendships that, like when someone would see something and say, "Oh, I think so and so will like it," being able to hand that to them and just that physicality of it compared to look this up, you'd like this. It's like you're really giving a gift, even though I'm going to end up buying it with my money because it's in the holds bin and you just put it on hold for me. But just that someone thought of me and physically took the time to do that rather than take 3 seconds to, hey, go Google this. There's something very personal about that.
yeah, exactly. And I think when I was younger, I'd worked at Walden Books for 7 years in a few different stores, and the connections I just built with people over the stuff they liked. I was in a small market store, and we had some. When I started, there were some really snobby sci-fi and fantasy readers who didn't particularly like anyone who worked in the store. And I'm not a huge reader of sci-fi and fantasy, but just talking to them about it, all of a sudden I became like their favorite employee because I was talking to them about it, even though I had, especially high fantasy, I have no interest in high fantasy. I don't want to learn the 17 class systems of your dwarfs. That's too much. That is too much. I want to escape reality. I don't want to have to learn a new, more rigid reality. But the people who love it. And to listen to them talk about it, there's such a passion. So to just be standing in a bookstore listening to someone talk about the lineage of this particular family in this imaginary world, it's enthralling to listen to someone be passionate and love something, which is
Mhm.
kind of really why I started this series in general, because I want to hear what people's stories are about things they like. And but there's a connection, especially if you'd mentioned George and the him seeing something, and that's just how physical media works. It's in your hand, someone's copy of something, or your copy of something is in your hand and someone sees it and they just connect to you on a personal level based on something you own, this piece of physical thing. And you're not going to get that same thing from my watch list on Hulu.
Right.
You aren't, especially because I'm probably not going to touch most of the stuff on my watch list on Hulu. The trailers looked fun, and I may never go back to them because I'm just going to rewatch Brooklyn Nine-Nine for the fourth time this year. So,
You know, we all have predictable patterns. I was wondering what the watch through was for you recently.
I mean, you can just go look.
That's true. But we do have the separate profiles on Hulu, so we have to be curious to go investigate. Or do
Yeah,
you just fine? and I haven't noticed because I just watched Survivor.
I well, and you told me you're just going to watch Survivor, so I didn't have to go on yours. No, I use my own. Well, and the other thing with streaming service, especially shared, uh, Brooklyn Nine Nine is on Peacock, and we don't have separate like. I don't even know if you hop on the Peacock. I know I sent you the login because it's the same as all of them. But recently, my brother and his future wife started watching Brooklyn Nine Nine, and they did it on Peacock, but we don't have separate accounts. And they started it right when I started a Peacock rewatch. And so I hopped on last night and was like, wait, I wasn't this far along in the series. And that's when I realized, oh, because we are sharing the streaming service, they have been watching it. And I hadn't watched it in the last couple weeks. And the beauty of that is it's on Hulu as well. So I'm just rewatching on Hulu instead of Peacock. But that was the, I mean, I know I've sent you messages before hopping on HBO Max to make sure you weren't watching something because I didn't want to ruin it for you by changing your spot. HBO Max is nice though because it kind of disappears after you complete it. So
Yeah, which is really helpful. I know we had to coordinate on The Mandalorian because you're like, oh, just hold off until it's all done. I'm like, no, we're going to need to talk about it.
yeah, and we just, I mean, thankfully, the way our schedules lined up, we watched it on different days naturally anyway. And since you're 700 years behind on the Marvel stuff, you'll never catch up to.
No, listen, this is great to bring up because I'm actively working on my Marvel watch through right now. I'm down to the last page of things that I need to watch. Currently, I'm watching The Inhumans TV show. It's not great, but I'm going to persevere because at this point, I've spent so much time in this watch through. I have to finish it the way I started it. But I just got to watch Spider-Man Homecoming. That was my last movie I got to watch. And I think
Okay.
Black Panther is up next for me. Yeah, that sounds right.
Well, and one of the things that slowed you down on this rewatch is you were buying the movies. The series you were streaming, but you were trying to buy the movies and then to buy them secondhand. And the Marvel movies don't drop much when it comes to the secondhand value because everyone's still trying to buy them. And
Mhm.
maybe Disney Plus has changed that. I can't tell you, having not been in the physical stores in so long, but that was one of those hard things. But if you remember, I told you to skip the series, that it didn't connect anyway.
You did, but I was a poor listener, and now here I am, all of these seasons and series deep at this point, but I'm getting close. Like I
Now,
feel like I can finish it by the end of the summer. Is my goal.
I genuinely enjoyed the first couple seasons of Agents of Shield. I didn't continue on watching it, but I know my father and a couple friends loved it straight through.
Mhm.
And the first couple seasons did vaguely interact with the movies, but now it's all been written out of the cinematic universe canon anyway. So, which is
Yeah,
unfortunate for people who spent all that time because a list on the internet gave them the proper viewing order.
not pointing fingers at anyone, are we?
I would never do something like that, and you know it. It is impressive that you've kept up with that commitment, though.
I took a little while off just because I've been so distracted with grad school and then Survivor and just other various interests. But I guess I was talking to my friend Chris and it came up. And I'm like, well, I feel like I'm getting closer if I actually sit down because I realized I can sit down and watch 3 episodes at night while I'm grading papers, or I can stream a movie on my lunch break or things like that. So finding practical ways to fit in my time. Now I have stopped buying all of the Marvel stuff because that is a financial commitment that I am not willing to make at this point. So I am going virtual for that. Also, because like I don't think I'll rewatch those very often.
I mean, I am one of the hosts of a comic book adaptation podcast, and I don't rewatch those movies often. I think I rewatched the Avengers movies over the summer, but oh, maybe it wasn't even the summer. Maybe it was in October when I had to quarantine. I rewatched them, but at that point, the first week I spent playing Monster Hunter, and the second week I was sick of Monster Hunter, so I needed something else to fill my time with because quarantine sucks. You've lived with me, you know. I'm kind of like go 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 when I can, and having 2 weeks of downtime was too much downtime.
Yeah, way too much for you.
Which is a thing you struggle with as well, which is why I think at one point you were working 87 jobs approximately.
Give or take a few. Yeah. I mean, I'm very happy to say that as of right now, I'm only working one job. And this summer, I should only be working one job. These are big steps for me.
Those are huge. I am also only working one job, which is now why I have 2 podcasts and a newsletter I'm doing on top.
Because there's too much free time.
Yeah. I created additional free work that also involves research, which is why it's great to pick a topic to talk to you about. I don't need to do research. Not that rewatching Mad Max Fury Road involved a lot of work.
Mm-hmm.
It was, but I will say, rewatching it, I didn't scroll on my phone at all. I didn't see it in theaters. I didn't see it until probably after you'd quit raving about it for a stretch. Not that you've ever quit raving about it, but after you'd quit raving about it.
Gave it a rest.
But you have your phone on, you're swiping, and you're distracted. But watching it to talk about it, it's so much better than I had thought. Just actually paying attention to the movie, like full attention. Mm-hmm. And that is one of the downfalls of our society. Like, it's wonderful how much we can multitask and how we can constantly be doing multiple things at once. But no, just like you said earlier about the book, where you physically have the book in your hands and your phone's turned upside down. It's unfortunate I don't treat movies that way, which is probably why I just watch the same sitcoms over and over again, because I don't need to treat them that way. I don't need to be paying attention to Scrubs to know when to laugh, because I have all those episodes memorized at this point. So
right.
I can just chuckle when I know I have always chuckled in the past. But putting down and engaging, and I think that goes back to the ownership of it. I think I'm more likely, if I've picked something up off my shelf over there and put it in, I'm going to pay attention to that more. Mm-hmm. Even though if I grab Billy Madison, which is a good example of something we wanted to watch one night and we couldn't find streaming anywhere, so I bought a copy of Billy Madison. And then I don't think we watched it.
Don't think we ever watched that together, actually.
Yeah, right. No. It was a one night like whim, early quarantine, I think.
Yeah.
Before quarantine, but it was just an early whim where I think I wanted to watch Billy Madison, and you're like, yeah, let's do it. And then we couldn't find it. But
we watched a lot of movies in quarantine.
We did, and we went through some lengths searching for where they could be streaming, because it was all movies neither of us owned. I guess we watched Robin Hood, which I own, but only on VHS, not on DVD or Blu-ray. So
did we stream Robin Hood, or because I'm pretty sure I have the DVD of Robin Hood?
Maybe we watched the DVD of that one.
Yeah.
We did not watch my VHS of it because we did not have a VCR.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's certainly an obstacle for those. I remember we streamed the one movie because I think we got so bored of scrolling through the normal streaming sites. We went onto the free streaming sites and we watched that one movie with the ridiculous long title about a bird.
Yeah, it was Pigeon, right? About a bit like.
Yeah. What was the thing that they always asked in like every scene? It was so bizarre.
Yeah, it was a weird movie, and I think it was on Tubi, was the free service we found it on.
Yeah, I think that's what it was.
And then like Tubi's interesting because it just streams afterwards. So you fell asleep watching Shaun of the Sheep immediately afterwards, and you woke up watching something even weirder later in the night.
It was very bizarre the way it connected.
I mean, the fact that it went from this weird indie movie out of Europe to Shaun of the Sheep, which is, I guess in theory, a children's movie, but not really a children's movie. But yeah, it made some weird jumps into that connection. But
yeah.
So there are obviously wonderful points of streaming that we could just pick a random movie off a random streaming service, but there are so many wonderful things that we gain from owning the actual physical copies. I think music, especially because
Mhm.
even if you buy digital copies of music or even digital copies of movies. I know Amazon just recently won a court case because they lost the rights to movies a woman had paid for. And so she lost those movies because you don't buy the movie, you buy the rights to view it while that service owns it. So
Mm.
if you're going to buy something off Amazon digitally, you could lose it at any moment because they could lose the rights to it. And as we see streaming mergers happen all the time,
Mhm.
that's going to happen. Like, I mean, Amazon now owns MGM. So if you bought it on a rival company, there could come a day that rival company is going to lose the Bond movies rights because they're now exclusively to Amazon. So,
Right. And then the other thing is things become harder to find, right? So something might have been streaming and it was so easy to find and then it just vanishes. Whereas if you have the hard copy, you're not, well, unless you lose it or something, you don't have to worry about not being able to find it. Because I know even some DVDs have become ridiculously hard to find. Like Osmosis Jones has made this really weird like cult comeback. It was like $20 at the exchange for this one movie, and it's harder and harder to find physical copies of it.
well, and Right Said Fred was an example of that. Remember, at one point it was up to like $50 for a used copy of Right Said Fred or
Mhm.
Drop Dead Fred, and that was a terrible movie. I loved as a child, but as a teenager, I couldn't get through. But people like the nostalgia factor just drove that price out because it didn't get a big DVD release, and then all of a sudden the kids who grew up watching it have money and they're trying to find it and it's just not available there. I remember during Trump's campaign and right after his election, Idiocracy was one of those movies. It
Mhm.
just skyrocketed in value and it wasn't streaming anywhere and people like wanted to see it because of the comparisons that are pretty damn accurate.
Right.
But all of a sudden, Idiocracy, a movie that didn't do too well, but was severely underrated, is now going for $30, $40 online. And it's just insane how quickly that can happen. And the nice part about owning that is, had you had a DVD copy of Idiocracy, you could have cashed it in and made a pretty penny because it was probably at a $5 bin at Walmart at one point. And
Right.
now all of
Well,
a sudden it's
not
going
that
for
long ago.
$50. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. There's a certain investment with owning things. Like even certain editions of books are that way too. And you can't. And I would always tell people this with video games. Um, they'd say, "Should I just buy it on the Nintendo store or whatever?" I'm like, always buy the physical copy because it's an investment. You're gonna get something back for it one day. And then sure enough, they bought the game physically from us. Months, maybe a year went by, they brought it back, they sold it to us, and they got the next thing they wanted. You can't do that when you have things online.
Well, the other thing is, as you upgrade, like the PS5 will play PS4 games, but it doesn't necessarily play older games that you bought just virtually. Like there are just weird instances where you're going to lose your games if you
Right.
just buy them digitally. But if you have them physically, you can always load them. I think one of the generations of systems has a memory battery that's going to die. And once that's gone, you can play physical copies. You can't play digital copies anymore. And I think that was specifically the three and the four for the PlayStation. So,
Mhm.
and even I think some runs of the five, but they've since fixed that. But like that's crazy to think that when this memory that is ridiculously hard to replace dies,
Mhm.
you're going to lose anything you paid for digitally, and especially video games. They're still $60.
Right.
There's no deal buying things digitally. With honestly, with a lot of things, so I think like CDs, like I guess they're still $10 to buy the 10-track CD or whatever, or $1 a song. So if you're going to spend the money, buy the physical copy. And that's my buddy Buck originally got into records because when I got a new turntable, he'd come over and we'd put on the Postal Service on vinyl, something he'd heard a lot both on CD and digitally. And he's like, wow, you can hear a difference. Also, how great if I'm going to own a physical copy is that it's a piece of art. And I'm like, exactly. And so he that night bought a record player and has been buying records ever since because he's right. And having resold records, I told the story on Battle of the Ballads a couple weeks ago how I had the Fugees album, and when I needed to sell a couple records for a trip, or right after a trip when I'd spent too much money is what it was. I that was one of the ones I selected that I knew I could get a good cash value for, and I got $25 cash for that. And the store I sold it to put it on their website and their wall for like 45 and it sold instantly. So I'm like, well, we both got a good deal, which had I sold it on my own, I would have gotten that $45, but that's not how that works if you're just going to sell it to a store. And I was just so happy that that record could get me $25.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm going to eat macaroni and cheese and rice, that's groceries for 2 weeks on $25. So maybe a frozen bag of chicken and rice. So like,
Mm-hmm.
it's wonderful just to have that when you get in a pinch. Not that I want anyone watching this to have to get into a pinch where they have to start selling their stuff. You'd mentioned books. I have a couple imported books that are worth a couple $1,000s. I'm never selling those books,
Mm-hmm.
but it's nice to have them. Same with basketball cards. For Christmas, I'd given my brother a Kobe Bryant rookie I've had for years. He could get it graded and he could get thousands of dollars for it right now. But the whole idea of giving it to him is I know it's going to sit in a case on his bookshelf until he dies. I mean, that's just how that's going to work. But that value is there. If something were to happen and he needed to sell it, he's got it. He's got it to sell it. But yeah, you get that value back for your physical media investment.
Yeah. And like even with the card, right? You probably didn't buy it for thousands of dollars, but it has matured to that value. And being able to give that to someone and say, hey, this isn't much, but this is the value behind it. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and at the same time, I gave him Jason Witten of the Dallas Cowboys like tight end card, which isn't worth much at all, but like it to him, those are two of his all-time favorite players. So sentimentally, they hold the exact same value,
Mm-hmm.
which is always another interesting topic about sales, and one we ran into buying stuff from people that listen, just because you love this artist doesn't mean it's worth anything because we have 14 copies downstairs that aren't selling. So, and that's always something hard to explain that your sentimental value doesn't translate to what we can buy for. But honestly, your sentimental value is more valuable. Keep the damn thing.
Mm-hmm.
If you love something physically, you're not going to get any amount of value compared to the physical joy you've had from owning it. So just own it.
Right.
Which
Absolutely.
I know is sometimes hard. We've moved a few times. We know how hard it is to lug everything you own when you own it.
Yeah.
But it is worth it. I mean, as you know, when I moved across country, I was going to leave my bed before I left my books and records. So,
Yeah.
and you were kind enough to surprise me by ordering a very nice air mattress in case I had to leave my bed.
We're very worried about that possibility. Like we can't do that.
uh, all right, Amy, I've kept you for an hour, so I will let you go. This has been wonderful, and I can't wait to see you this summer in person.
It's gonna be so soon. I need to start booking my flight.
And I can't wait until we can do this again on My Friends Like Cool Shit. Maybe when you finish your Marvel rewatch, we can talk, even if you didn't particularly care for the rewatch. I would be curious to hear like the general experience of it. Obviously, I know some because you started this many, many years ago and we lived together for many years while you were going through it.
It might have been the first year we lived together that I started.
You might be right about that. But I'd be excited to hear about like the overall journey and maybe even a comparison because I know you have done the machete order for the Star Wars films.
Mhm.
So I would love to hear even you comparing and contrasting the the significance of these two like orders and rewatches too. So and then the hundreds of other things we can talk about you going through lakes to get the perfect photo for a photograph too. Like
I can't wait for you to see those pictures because the pictures are amazing. Totally worth it.
I am excited. All right, thank you so much, Amy. I love you. I miss you.
Love you too. Miss you too. See you soon.